In our last episode, the Lancers and Losers found themselves contracted by NHP Cyclo for a retrieval mission. After 27% of all NHPs galaxy-wide went rogue, Cyclo lost connection to several NHP-controlled drones used for research and documentation. It just so happened that the nearest system, a mining world, had several AI that went missing. After some light reconnaissance and heavy drinking, we found that a local quarry and mine housed the lost NHPs. We also found out that it was guarded. So, realizing that a peaceful resolution was probably not in the cards, we mounted up and set out into the desert. After a good bit of walking, we arrived on the edge of the quarry. From our mechanized chassis, we had a good vantage point over the rock pit. The actual ground was a deep reddish brown, with a layer of gray dust covering every surface where rock was blasted away. All signs of activity pointed to one major tunnel. From there, the paths seemed to diverge. Not wanting to waste any time, Levy flew down into the pit while the rest of the party either climbed or slid down the rock wall. Finally, after countless quips and regrouping, the party descended into the dirt for what was a pretty uneventful day. It sure is crazy how much happened at once. Our mechs lumbered into a massive chamber, carved out ages ago by explosives. The air was stale and tasted vaguely of salt, even from within our cockpits. The room was almost split down the middle by a massive wall of stone, creating two corridors. The only time the left and right halves of the room met were at the front and back. A faint, pulsating orange glow emanated from 3 different tunnels splitting off the main chamber at different points. We didn't get to take in the sights for long, because almost immediately after we crowded through the entrance, a signal connected to our comm beads. What sounded like a lady with a southern drawl came to life and demanded to know who we were or why we started intruding on her negotiations. The voice was almost too perfect. It had a sterile quality that seemed to reverberate through the entire room, not just her own communicators. Right after she finished speaking, Cyclo connected to the channel and began debating the unknown voice, which it called Suda. From their conversation, we learned that Suda was another high-level NHP specializing in forging treaties. Cyclo berated Suda for interfering with humans again, and asked for its research drones back as kindly as an emotionless alien conscience can. Suda remained adamant, however, and punctuated its point by sending several mechs and even a few teams of infantry swarming into the room. We interjected and asked if there could be a peaceful solution. Maybe we could come back after the treaty with the mining companies Suda was brokering was complete. However, Cyclo informed us that these NHPs had a shelf life, and it wasn't paying us to wait around and make compromises. Cyclo hired us to get their AI back as quickly as possible. It assured us that Suda was not a threat personally, and gave us the all-clear to resort to force. With our boss giving the okay, we sprang into action. With the stone wall creating 2 parallel paths, we were forced to choose our targets from the start. This worried us. We didn't know if Suda had reinforcements coming and we'd be split up, but now wasn't the time to sit and strategize. Levy, in typical restless fashion, was the first to move. The cavern started to heat up as Levy's suit, Sky Chaser's flight unit, powered up. The thrusters burst to life and Levy rocketed through the right side of the room, making use of the high ceiling to maneuver around incoming fire. They landed with a loud thud, kicking up rock and dust as they slid into cover. This didn't last long, however, as they immediately popped back out to bombard the nearest enemy with their machine gun. With how tall and rounded the chamber was, the barrage of shots sent a series of clattering bangs reverberating around the room, practically deafening the infantry on the ground. Responding as fast as they could, the first hostile mech leapt into action. Its flamethrower swept a line of fire across the ground, almost frying Levy and creating a burning wall, halting our advance through the hallway. Responding to this, Edward's mech, the ace up my sleeve, barreled down the right-hand corridor after Levy, powering up his Cyclone pulse cannon and firing a blast that obliterated a mech supporting the pyro with one shot. In the other half of the room, a mech crouched down before deploying an automated turret, which quickly started pouring fire down the hall at Jeremy and Derek. Jeremy wasn't the kind of man to run, however, so he sprinted down the hallway, dodging as he went and ducking into cover behind one of the lit passages. He took some pot shots at the turret with his pistols and did some damage, but couldn't put it down. To make matters worse, the last mech strutted over and applied some paste or something to the turret and made enough repairs to keep the thing running at peak efficiency. Jeremy let out a groan of frustration before Derek Gage told him he'd show you how it's done. When Jeremy asked him how, Gage pulled out a fucking rocket launcher and fired it down the hall, hitting the engineer, medic, and the turret, leaving them all much worse for wear. Unfortunately, worse for wear doesn't mean dead. In the right corridor, the infantry were trying to keep Levy and Edward in cover while avoiding getting team killed by the mech with the flamethrower. Jeremy dodged past some more gunfire and managed to throw his suit into the entryway on his left. He looked up to see a large machine hooked up to a smaller canister housing a small ball of orange light, pulsing in rhythm with the machine's sensors. He radioed Cyclo, and the boss confirmed that the canister had one of the AIs it was looking for. Jeremy walked up to the canister and opened his cockpit to pull it into his suit. The machine gave off some brief sparks and seemed to stop working after the forceful extraction, but nonetheless, Reingard had been the first of us to actually contribute to the mission objective. Unfortunately, when he ran out of the room and rounded the corner, he didn't just see Gage's suit, but something new. We weren't naive enough to think that Suda wouldn't call for reinforcements. We were, however, naive enough to think that those reinforcements would come from deeper in the mines. Evidently, whoever Suda was working with had a beefy defense budget and forces stationed throughout the area, so when the new mecha opened up on Derek and Jeremy with a hail of missiles, the entire comm channel was filled with curses and musings as to why we didn't see this coming. Edward and Levy's luck wasn't much better. There was another reinforcing mech on their side of the divider, and it started making walls to protect itself and box us in, with the only available direction now being towards the wall of thermite. Edward was reloading his cannon, so it fell to Levy to finish the flamethrower off. Despite the fact that Levy had already shot it to hell, it took an unreasonable amount of effort to neutralize that bastard. Levy had to open up on full with their machine gun and assault rifle, shredding the infantry in between in the process. Even with this absolutely crushing barrage, it still held on by a thread. So, Levy decided to book it through the air and move towards the closest offshoot tunnel, leaving Lee to handle both of the enemies at once. Levy's personal channel was immediately filled with cries from Edward to come back and help. Levy asked if he'd ever gotten into a real fight before, which was met by a lot of indignance and not a lot of specifics. After a brief argument, Levy just shrugged and told Edward that if he hated being alone so much, he could just follow them. Edward reluctantly obliged, dodging another burst from the flamethrower and using his jump jets to get over the firewall. From there, all he needed were his twin pistols to hit that stubborn bastard's off switch. The pyro erupted into flame and exploded in a blinding flash, which was becoming somewhat of a theme at this point. Well, at least the dead infantry couldn't lose their vision as well as their hearing. In the adjacent room, Levy saw a similar sight to Jeremy, and used their mech's hands to bring the second AI unit into their cockpit while Edward guarded the entrance. Meanwhile, Jeremy decided that when stuck between a turret and an oncoming missile, charging a hail of bullets was better than charging the thing that blew up. Besides, that turret and the two mechs supporting it were the only things between him and what was presumably the last AI room of the mission. He blew by the repair mech and hit the engineer on the side with his charge blade, nearly cutting it in two. The mech put up as much of a fight as it could, but without its turret it was pretty defenseless as Jeremy hacked it to bits. Before dealing the final blow, Jeremy took the time to taunt and set up a finishing move, which he performed to an audience of Derek Gage, who was too busy to pay attention, and the two enemy mechs actively trying to kill him. Derek was distracted because as he followed after Jeremy, the supporting mech hit him with that similar goo that he used to fix the turret. While the fast-acting compound tried to fix the enemy gun earlier, this time it solidified into a restraint that slowed Gage down significantly, which in turn made the incoming missile fire even more dangerous. Jeremy grabbed the third and final AI, and Cyclo chimed in to let us know that no other NHP signals were detected in the area, so we were clear to leave. This was great, were it not for the few things that prevented us from leaving. Derek decided that Jeremy could help himself and broke free of the support's binding gun only to run at full speed in the opposite direction. Weaving between projectiles as he went, he came upon the mech that Cyclo called a Stormbringer before jumping into the air. Once there, Derek Gage whipped out his heavy charge blade and cleaved the Stormbringer in two, to the astonishment and insane hype of everyone else. He got cooped on his run back, but he was fine. As he was doing this, Levy came shooting over the artificially printed wall and fired their machine gun into the second reinforcement's back to weaken it. Edward was close behind, but wasn't able to get past the rapidly forming walls the mech was creating. So, for the second time that day, while the enemy was focusing on Edward and with Levy's fire support, Derek Gage got behind the hostile mech and cut it in half with his sword. Crackling energy trailed in the afterimage of the blade as it effortlessly separated the mech's armor. It had started to put up a barrier to defend itself, but Gage's weapon passed through the half-formed construct like a knife through butter. You gotta feel bad for the pilot. Getting bisected and electrocuted at the same time must suck. Still, it was his fault at the end of the day. He didn't have to show up halfway through the fight and try to kill us. With that taken care of, the remaining support could hardly stop us from leaving as quickly as possible, especially with that stupid cum gun. We got into the desert, loaded our mechs and Cyclo's AI onto a transport it sent, and then returned to town for a night of partying. With less bar fights this time. The next morning, Cyclo informed us that another transport was coming to pick us up. Sure enough, we found the ship and were ferried up to Cyclo's station. Once we arrived, we were pleased to see our mechs back in pristine condition. A service drone on Cyclo's behalf instructed us to return to the briefing room from earlier. We walked in to see Cyclo, the same as last time. In fact, just like last time, it had identified a new planet with something important in a system not too far from our current position. Cyclo told us that we would be transferred to another station and further instructed by one of Cyclo's associates. From there, the associate would provide us with more information and the means to descend onto the planet itself. When we asked who the associate was, Cyclo responded that we actually knew them. Our jaws hit the floor as the NHP explained how we'd be working with none other than Suda on the next assignment. Cyclo reminded us that Suda itself was not hostile, just territorial over its agreements. Despite our interference, we hadn't disrupted the actual treaty between mining companies Suda presided over, so no ill will was held. After some more briefing, the gang set off to Suda's station. In the meantime, the party used their now increased license levels to give their mecha some well-deserved upgrades. Levy took a level in Monarch and received the Sharanga missiles and Javelin rockets. Gage took a level in Metal Mark for the flash charges and reactive weave, also because he really likes SSC mechs. Jeremy got the chain axe and synthetic muscle netting from the Blackbeard license, and Edward Lee decided to channel his inner gunslinger and unlock the first Raleigh license. This got him some files for a hand cannon and some breach blast charges. We didn't just get mech upgrades. Cyclo helpfully provided us with a robotic assistant, like a team mascot. It was designated as drone 37H4N, but we called it Ethan. Ethan Drone didn't do much but float around and talk to us, but we appreciated the company. Unlike Cyclo and Suda, he seemed to have an actual personality, and a likable one at that. When we arrived at Suda's station, we were taken aback. The thing seemed to be shaped like an actual goddamn dove, and it took the whole piece motif really far. Once we got out of the hangar, we were met with a large room that seemed to be full of trees. Olive trees, to be specific. Fucking hell. A screen materialized with a representation of what we assumed was Suda, though this time it didn't have the southern drawl. It greeted us and explained that Cyclo asked for help in assisting with our mission. It gave us some very basic coordinates of the planet we'd be dropping on. It was a jungle world this time, and we had to find some relay towers in a vast series of ruins and reactivate them. Apparently they were crucial to Cyclo's ability to communicate with its drones. However, Suda informed us that we can make ample use of downtime to prepare for the mission. Instead of leaving immediately, Jeremy and Derek started arguing. Gage kept getting Rangard's name wrong and Jeremy was sick of it. He kept screaming, "Jeremy, Jeremy, Jeremy," and demanded the disgraced actor respect him. This was met with casual indifference, a few pointed comments about Jeremy having breadsticks up his ass. The nonsensical exchange continued for a while, until Suda asked Edward and Levy to please leave and take this squabbling pair with them. For the purposes of keeping things civil, Levy and Derek, being the two pilots of the group, decided to take separate ships. While Levy figured they would split their other teammates between them, Derek immediately rushed to his craft to try and get a solo flight. Unfortunately for Gage, all that running from danger Edward did in the Union paid off. He got to the ship almost before Derek did. After that, it was easy to sneak aboard. Derek sat down in the pilot's seat, heard something, and turned around to see Edward standing there. Ethan Drum was there too. Derek swore to himself, but he said that there was something he needed to do, and that Edward would make good company. Hearing this on the radio, and deciding it was more fun than just wasting time, Levy followed Gage's ship as it docked to the Blink Space Terminal and hurtled off through the stars. Levy figured out the coordinates through Edward video calling them via data slate and recording Gage's controls over his shoulder. So, the losers set off on a little adventure before they perform yet another daring mission. Tune in next time for what I can guarantee will be the silliest episode of Lancers and Losers yet. It's the one where Derek Gage accidentally fucks up everything for everybody. You're gonna love it, I promise. Have a good night.